Graham Plattner easily won the Democratic primary in Maine for the U.S. Senate. He received 72% of the vote, setting up a high-stakes race against incumbent Republican Senator Susan Collins this fall. Plattner's campaign carries multiple scandals into the midterm matchup. He's admitted to sending sexually explicit messages to other women during his marriage, which his wife said they worked through and is a private matter. But he also denied a New York Times report that he behaved in a demeaning manner towards some former girlfriends, including 2 incidents in which he was allegedly physically menacing to one of them. Plattner also claims he didn't know that a tattoo he had for nearly 20 years was linked to a Nazi symbol. He has since had the tattoo covered. Plattner addressed some of his past scandals last night in his victory speech.
I am a son of rural Maine. I was a kid who picked blueberries under the July sun, and then one day, I was a kid who signed up and left to fight for his country. And when I returned, I carried with me the weight of forever wars and the struggle and the alienation that came with it. But I'm also a lucky one who found his way back, who found a living on the sea, and a home and a community that offered love and redemption. Redemption is not just some simple or easy destination. It's a journey. I've made mistakes in my life, mistakes that I regret, that I live with, and that I continue to learn from. And I'm still far from perfect. But every day, I wake up and I try to be a little bit better and a little bit kinder than I was the day before. And if you give me the chance, I will be a senator for the people who cannot afford to buy a senator.
Joining us now, White House correspondent for The Hill, Julia Manchester. Julia, thank you for coming on set this morning after yet another election night. It seems like since Graham Plattner emerged onto the scene last year in a pretty viral, splashy way, that controversies have ensued. But it obviously didn't stop him from taking the nomination, although that really did not seem in question after Janet Mills dropped out. But in terms of what that means for the general election, what are your takeaways?
Well, look, I think all of this depends on, how bad is the national environment for someone like Susan Collins, an incumbent Republican, for it to eclipse these scandals. We've seen a number of, some Democratic voters. He obviously won the primary handily last night, but there are Democratic voters in Maine we've chatted with who are concerned about how these scandals play in the long run. It's not just the Democratic voters, it's the swing voters, the independent voters that will ultimately, I think, make this decision. And the question is, do they hold their nose, as some say, and vote for someone like Graham Plattner, like many other voters have done with Donald Trump when he's faced scandals in the past? Or do they switch towards Susan Collins, an incumbent Republican who has been, I think she's proven in the past to be a very formidable candidate in these tough election environments?
Although it is interesting when you're looking at Susan Collins' actions and votes on the Hill recently. She hasn't necessarily taken a stand against Trump or really tried to separate herself as she's done in some of her past elections. Yeah. But this could be one of the biggest, most expensive state races in history. How do you see it unfolding?
Well, look, I think you're going to see, obviously, a lot of outside players getting involved here. But I thought it was interesting looking at the statements we saw from a number of Democratic actors. Janet Mills, the governor of Maine, even though she suspended her campaign, she was technically still on the ballot. And within the last few weeks, we've heard some of her allies say, remind voters that she's still on the ballot. And we heard these rumblings that, maybe she was considering getting back in if need be. In her statement, she did not mention Graham Plattner once. In the Democratic Senatorial Campaign Committee statement, the Senate campaign arm for Democrats, they made somewhat of a passing mention of Plattner at the very end, saying they would support him. But it seemed to be a statement more about Susan Collins than Graham Plattner. Progressives, on the other hand, people like Elizabeth Warren from Massachusetts, have been very vocal about Graham Plattner, praising him. So I am curious to see if we see this divide within the party that we've seen during this very, I think, what's becoming an increasingly ugly campaign. If we see Democrats coalesce around Plattner. I don't know if that's happening yet.
Yeah, and whether that will impact his fundraising numbers. But Julia, I want you to stick with me. But first, let's go through some results. In South Carolina, Senator Lindsey Graham has secured the Republican nomination in his Senate primary race. Graham is now going to face Democratic nominee Dr. Annie Andrews, a pediatrician, in November. Andrews has run in the past. In the race for governor, the Trump-endorsed Lieutenant Governor Pamela Evette will advance to a runoff against State Attorney General Alan Wilson. That is happening later this month. This effectively ends the political careers of Congresswoman Nancy Mace and Congressman Ralph Norman, who both gave up their House seats in order to run in the gubernatorial primary. Mace attributed her fifth-place loss last night to her push for the release of the Epstein files. And in California, Republican Steve Hilton will advance to November's general election. He'll face Democrat Javier Becerra, who previously served as California's Attorney General and Health and Human Services Secretary under the Biden administration. After a week of counting ballots, Hilton had planned to hold a press conference yesterday to address the baseless fraud allegations. But it was called off when it was projected that he would be moving on in the race. Senate Majority Leader John Thune pushed back on claims of voter fraud in California that have been propagated and spread by President Trump and some of his allies. But Thune did criticize the state's method of counting votes in an interview yesterday with CNBC.
Frankly, you have to prove if there was cheating, and clearly that's something that you would have to do in California or anywhere else for that matter. But the fact that it takes days, literally days, to be able to count votes in a state like California, when there are other states around the country who do that very quickly and get an outcome and a result, it's incompetence, if nothing else. And whether or not there was actual rigging is something that have to be proven. But clearly, this is a system in California that doesn't work and doesn't inspire confidence and trust in voters by the voters.
Okay, there's a lot to unpack there, but let's reverse a little bit and go back to South Carolina. Nancy Mace is the latest sort of casualty of lawmakers who have gone against the president with regards to the Epstein files, Thomas Massie being the previous one. What are your biggest takeaways from the results of that of last night in South Carolina?
Well, look, I think coming out of Iowa, when we saw Congressman Randy Feenstra, who was endorsed by Donald Trump in that primary, there was a question of, after that loss, whether there was a weakness of the Trump endorsement or if it was an anomaly. Last night, I think, proved it was clearly an anomaly. But again, it's stunning to see someone like Nancy Mace, who has become a very vocal voice on Capitol Hill, a very controversial voice on Capitol Hill on a number of issues, lose her primary. I also think Ralph Norman, who maybe is not as well known, not as vocal, he is one of a number of Freedom Caucus members, for example, who will not be returning to Capitol Hill next year. So this is certainly, I think, a number of takeaways, but we'll be watching for this runoff between Wilson and Evette. Still another test for the Trump endorsement in South Carolina.
Yeah, and I guess after Ken Paxton, Ed Galbraith, and now Evette, it's he's what, 3 for 4 of the president? But let's move on to California. Okay. President Trump is pushing these unfounded fraud allegations. I mean, how do you see that affecting the results going forward? Do you think there's going to be potentially any changes that California could implement before the general election? And I guess taking a step back here, I mean, it does feel like what the president is doing is previewing a tried strategy that he's used in the past for November midterms to maybe get ahead of some of the losses he's going to see in November.
Right, and there's no evidence that fraud has taken place in California. But I thought it was interesting listening to John Thune's comments yesterday, saying that there's no evidence fraud has taken place, but talking about how, California needs to improve its counting methods, its strategies going forward. We also heard Congressman Ro Khanna, a Democrat progressive from California, sort of echo that, pushing as we saw a number of years ago in 2020, you do see a difference in how some Republican leaders like John Thune are responding to this versus the president. If the president continues to push these claims, maybe that creates tension there.
White House correspondent for The Hill, Julia Manchester, thank you for breaking all of that down for us. Wide-ranging morning.